I'm aware, sorry, that I'm speaking to you a cross between Scary Spice and an alien, so please just ignore the fact that that's what I look like and try and take me seriously. So today I want to have a look at how we can prove that the resurrection actually happened. So I would like a volunteer, please. I'm not going to kill you and raise you from the dead, don't worry. Come on then, Yosan. And Kat or Joseph, either one of you, could one of you come down to the front? You could be my other volunteer. Come on, Joseph, you're on the end of the line. Right, you've been specifically picked.
Didn't even hear what you said.
I just need a volunteer. Yosan, can you tell me what 2 plus 2 equals? 4. Can you prove to me that 2 plus 2 equals 4? Yeah?
2.
Perfect. 2 and 2 equals 4. That is good proof. Now then, Joseph, can you prove to me that Kat loves you?
In many ways.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Hit me.
Let's see here. Well, she hasn't yet read my PhD thesis, so that's one where she hasn't. She's with me all the time. She never leaves me. Even if I make some bad decisions, she still is around. She's got somebody in her oven, so to speak.
Okay, Joseph, these are all very cute things, but I'm afraid you're not. Yosan gave me proof, right? 2 and 2 is always going to equal 4. Right. What you're saying is lovely, but you're not proving, not much.
She's got a ring on it.
Well, I mean, she's got a ring on it.
Is that?
The point I'm trying to make is it is very, very difficult outside the realm of pure mathematics to prove anything. We all know that Joseph and Kat love each other. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But they actually can't... Sorry, I'm crackling, aren't I? I'm going to try and stay still. They can't prove that in the way that we can prove that 2 and 2 equals 4. 2 and 2 is always going to equal 4, unless you read 1984, so don't read that, will confuse you. But 2 and 2 is always going to equal 4. We can prove that. Whereas in the rest of life, we often operate in a way that's similar to what they do in the law courts, where they use a phrase that says, proof beyond all reasonable doubt. And what they mean by that is you can't mathematically prove that a certain criminal committed that crime. But what you can do is put all of the facts of the case in order and have a look at them and see actually what is the overwhelming evidence pointing to. Is it pointing to the fact that they did the crime, or is it pointing to the fact that they didn't do the crime? And actually that's the proof that we operate day to day. In the same way that you can't mathematically prove that you love someone, there are things like the wedding ring, like the fact that Kat sticks with Joseph through thick and thin. That's proof, not in the mathematical sense, but it's proof that Joseph and Kat love each other. And that we can't mathematically... I'm really sorry, I'm going to move this because it's going to really annoy you, isn't it? Sorry. There we go. You can't mathematically prove... It's not working at all now, is it? It's fine, I'll speak loudly. You can't mathematically prove that the resurrection happened, but there are certain things that you can look at that shows that actually, like in a law court, you can say proof beyond all reasonable doubt. Oh, sorry, it's really not working. Do you know what, I'm just going to hold it. There we go. There we go. I'm going to hold it gently. Yeah, let's do that. That was a good idea. Sorry, everyone. Excellent. In the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is talking about the resurrection, and he lists lots of different people who claim to have seen the risen Lord. And for each of them, they believe that they saw Jesus risen from the dead. As did the 4 gospel writers, they believe that Jesus rose from the dead. But let's imagine that he didn't rise from the dead. What are the other options? Okay, so we've got the swoon theory. The idea that actually Jesus just fainted on the cross, he didn't really die, and then when he got to the grave, because it was nice and cold in the grave, He revived, he came back to life, he broke out of the tomb, and he never really died in the first place. Now, I don't think this works for a number of reasons. Firstly, because of historical evidence. Throughout the whole history of Roman execution in the form of crucifixion, there's only one person who's ever survived crucifixion, and he was only up there for a matter of moments, and he was taken immediately off the cross and immediately given medical attention. Other than that, every single person who was crucified died because it's such a brutal death. And that's just the cross itself. Let's not forget that actually Jesus had a crown of thorns shoved onto his head, so he would have been bleeding a lot from that. You know how much your head bleeds. If you cut your head, it bleeds loads. And then as well as that, Jesus would have been whipped. But he would have been whipped not just with like a leather whip. They used something in that time called a flagrum, which was a leather whip that had pieces of bone and metal on it. And so as you whipped someone, you would literally rip their flesh off with those pieces of bone and metal. And actually, lots of people died even before they got to crucifixion from this whipping. And then once Jesus has done this, he has to carry a really heavy cross up a massive hill to where he's being crucified. And then he's crucified, and as we've seen over this week, crucifixion was the most gruesome type of death. So I don't think that stands up, but also there's medical evidence to suggest that that can't be the case. In John's Gospel, it talks about one of the Roman soldiers piercing Jesus' side, and when that happens, blood and water spills out at the same time, and they've separated. Now, if anyone here is planning on being a doctor or is planning on studying medicine, you will find out that when a person dies, they get a blood clot around their heart, and when that happens, the blood and the water separates. So that there is proof that Jesus died, and John includes that in his gospel because people would have known that. The blood and the water separating is proof that Jesus actually died. So I don't think that's a feasible option. Feel free to disagree with me, but let's have a look at some of the other options, in which case, if Jesus did actually die on the cross, then these other options suggest that he didn't really rise from the dead. Does anyone know what a tomb would have looked like back in the day? Yeah? Cool. Yeah, it would have basically been a cave sort of cut into the rock, and they would have had a massive boulder in front of it to seal it off, to stop people stealing the body. Now, another option is that the disciples stole the body. Now, can I have two volunteers, but these need to be quite specific? I need someone who's very big and strong, and someone who's very little. Excellent. Now, I want you to stand in like solid with your hands, really solid. Okay, and now I want you to, okay, so this is the tomb behind you. You're trying to get into the tomb. Can you try and get past Luke? Very good. Very good. Okay, you can sit back down. That didn't go quite as round. What was meant to happen was Luke was meant to be so big and strong that Jojo couldn't get past him, but unfortunately that slightly backfired. The Roman soldiers who would have been in charge of stopping people from stealing the bodies. Do you guys know what Marines are? They're like the most hardcore of the military, right? They're like Jack Bauer in 24, if you've seen that. These Roman soldiers were seriously hardcore. They were proper ninjas. If a Roman soldier fell asleep on duty, another Roman soldier had full permission to kill that soldier because they weren't doing their job properly. They were like cutthroat, hardcore, really, really strong. And this is one of the reasons why I think that the disciples stealing the body just isn't an option, because imagine the Roman soldier is really strong, standing like this, and the disciples, let's imagine their friend and their religious leader died 3 days ago. Now, in Jewish culture and in the culture in that time, if someone close to you died, you fasted, you stopped eating, and you went into mourning. So they would have been really weak, they hadn't eaten for days, they would have been really sad, all of their hopes and dreams have been shattered. Do you think someone that weak and feeble and broken would be able to get past one of those strong Roman guards? I don't think that's very realistic. Let's imagine by some miraculous thing they did what Jojo did, managed to go under their legs, maybe the guard's sleeping, and they do manage to get into the tomb and steal the body. I think this theory also falls down on another line, which is more important. Pretty much all of the early, all of the disciples and a lot of the early Christians died for their faith. Now, why on earth would they be willing to die for something that they knew wasn't true? Christianity, the very heart of their faith, is based on the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. That's what their faith is all about. And if that wasn't true, why on earth would they be willing to die for it? Why on earth would they be spreading the good news that Jesus has risen from the dead if they knew that he hadn't actually risen from the dead? So that's the other option. We've got the swoon theory, the fact that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. We've got the suggestion that the disciples stole the body. Now, what about the Jewish authorities? What if they stole the body? I think this is a little bit of a weird one, given that it was the Jewish authorities that made sure that there was a Roman soldier guarding the tomb so that no one did steal the body. Even if, for whatever reason, they decided to steal the body, I think it's very clear that if people start talking about the fact that Jesus had risen from the dead and therefore he must be God, they'd have wheeled out the body as soon as they could, wouldn't they, to squash that rumour. Look, he's not God, the body's here. So I don't think that one stands up either. The next one is tomb robbers. Maybe some tomb robbers came and stole the body. And I think on first glance, this one is a little bit more realistic because they're professionals. They would have been much stronger than the disciples. They probably would have been able to overpower one of the Roman guards. However, we talked a little bit about this yesterday when we were talking about Lazarus dying. It's a really hot country, right? So when people died, they would have absolutely stank because their body would have started decomposing. So the way that they stopped that happening was to put spices onto the body to kind of embalm them, and then they'd wrap them in grave clothes. And these spices were incredibly expensive, and the grave clothes were also incredibly expensive. And Jesus would have been buried with these spices and with these grave clothes. So why on earth would the tomb robbers, who were really out to get money, why would they have left the only things that were of value, the only things that would have cost anything, and take the worthless body? It says in the Gospels that the grave clothes and the spices were left, but the body had gone. So that doesn't make sense either, I don't think. And then the last option is that all the people that claim to have seen Jesus risen from the dead were just hallucinating. They were just imagining that it was Jesus. And actually, it wasn't really him. It was just all in their head. It was all in their imagination. There's a lot more I could say about this, and if you're interested in it, please come and talk to me afterwards. But the only thing I'm going to say on this one is, in that passage where Paul is talking about the different people that have seen Jesus rise from the dead, he says that at one time there were 500 people who saw Jesus rise from the dead. Now, nowhere in medical, psychological history is there ever the evidence of a collective hallucination. Lots of people seeing one thing all at the same time. So it falls down on those grounds. I think it's fair to say that the disciples would have been just as surprised as we would about Jesus coming back from the dead. We would be incredibly surprised if we saw someone rise from the dead, and so too would the disciples. But if we go back to that law court, let's imagine all of the facts are in front of us. You then have to decide whether it's happened or not happened, whether the person has committed the crime or not committed the crime. And actually, sometimes there are facts in front of us which make what would normally be incredibly unlikely, likely. Let me explain with an example. There is a park in London called Regent's Park, and it's right next to London Zoo. And in Regent's Park, tons of people come and walk their dogs, and let's imagine a friend of mine was walking their dog and they came back to me and they said, "Oh my goodness, you're never going to believe what I saw in Regent's Park today." "What did you see in Regent's Park today?" "I saw a lion." "Stop it, you didn't see a lion in a park, don't be silly. You obviously just saw a dog, right? It was just a big dog that looked like a lion." So I don't believe my friend, I don't believe that she saw a lion in Regent's Park. Then I get home and I switch on the news, and the news says that one of the lions in London Zoo, which, let's remember, is right next to Regent's Park, has escaped. Now, how much more likely is her story? Pretty likely, right? If a lion has escaped from the zoo, right next to the park, it's now pretty likely that she may have seen a lion. That new bit of evidence makes it much more likely. And in the same way, actually, the resurrection, of course it's unlikely. People don't rise from the dead. But when you look at the facts and you look at the alternatives, actually, it does seem to be a likely event. So I think we need to do what Sherlock Holmes does. Do you all watch Sherlock Holmes? Love a bit of Sherlock Holmes. He says this: when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that actually the resurrection is pretty improbable, but we've ruled out all other options, and therefore it must be the truth. I hear rumours that there may be some Man City fans in the house. We have a show of hands? This is just so exciting because I live in London, right? And literally no one in London supports Man City. Okay, so there aren't many Man City fans, but for those of you out there, let's imagine Sergio Aguero wrote an autobiography. So he wrote all about his time at Argentina and at Man City. And let's imagine he writes just completely wrong things about some of his players. So he makes up stuff about his Argentinian teammates, he makes up stuff about the Man City guys. Do you think the people that he's written wrong stuff about, do you think they'd just sit tight and let that happen? Or do you think they'd try and correct what he said? What do we reckon? Would they just let it lie? They'd tell the media. Spot on. They'd go to the media and say, Aguero's lying, this is actually what happened. And it would have been exactly the same 2,000 years ago, when Paul was writing. And in his letter, when Paul is talking about the resurrection, he names lots of people who say that they've seen the risen Jesus. And basically what Paul is doing here is saying, look, these guys are still alive. They claim to have seen the risen Jesus. You go and ask them yourselves. You ask so-and-so. You ask Bob down the road. You ask this person. And you let them tell you whether they saw the risen Jesus. He's name-checking them. And also it's giving them the opportunity. If he's got the facts wrong, he's saying, look, you let them correct you. So, given that we're talking about a court of law, I would now like to make you guys into the law court, and I want you to stand up when you think for the most realistic option for Jesus, for the tomb being empty. Does anyone here think that Jesus didn't really die on the cross? If you did, if you think that, stand up. Does anyone think that the disciples could have stolen the body? Stand up. Does anyone think that the Jewish authorities stole the body? Stand up. What about it was hallucinations? They would just imagine that they saw the risen Jesus. Stand up. Okay, and does anyone here think that Jesus actually rose from the dead? Stand up. That is pretty cool. Okay, brilliant. Sit down. What you guys are claiming here is pretty radical. But you can see actually that by looking at the alternatives, we're kind of left, this is our only option, right? Jesus really did rise from the dead. Can I get a whoop whoop? Yeah. I don't want you to just take this from me, that Jesus rose from the dead. You know, if you're still not sure what happened at the resurrection, you go and investigate it for yourself. Like the guy I was talking about yesterday, Lee Strobel, who set out to look at whether the resurrection actually happened and in the process became a Christian. And another guy who did that was C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia Chronicles. And I just want to finish with what he says in his autobiography. He was desperate for Christianity not to be true, because he knew that if it was true, it would change his life. And he says this: "You must picture me alone in my room, night after night, feeling, whenever my mind lifted from my work, the steady, unrelenting approach of him who I so desperately desired not to meet. That which I greatly feared at last came upon me. In the summer term of 1929, I gave in and I admitted that God was God, and I knelt and prayed, perhaps that night the most depressed and reluctant convert in all of England." I love that. He was so just reluctant to become a Christian because he just was fighting it so much. He really wanted Christianity and the resurrection to not be true because he knew that it would change his life. But he couldn't help but be overwhelmed by the evidence. Jesus really is the resurrection and the life. Jesus is alive, which means that he lives in all of us now. It means that when we go into school, Jesus is with us. When we go into our family, Jesus is with us. When we go into those really tricky situations where you just don't know how you're going to see it through, Jesus is with you. And it means that when you pray to God, he hears you because he's alive. And it means that he will answer you. And it means that he will change you. Actually, the stuff that you're really not proud of, the parts of your character that are just horrible, because Jesus is alive, he has the power to change you. We saw that with my dad, we saw it with Will. He gives us the power to have a new life, to have a fresh start. Jesus is with us here. And I just want to quickly pray. And it may be the first time you've ever prayed this. It may be the millionth time you've prayed it. And it doesn't matter either way. But I'm just going to pray the oldest prayer in the church, which is, come, Holy Spirit. Just that God, Jesus who is alive, will come and live with us. And will be with us as we make our decisions. Will be with us as we go back home. Be with us as we go probably back into some really tricky situations.